Lightning like Steve McQueen. I'm in the fast lane when the light turns green. And I built tough, I ain't nothing but grit. Cause I made rugged blood, sweat, and spit. Yeah, like a horse I fly. Better push yourself in for a bumpy ride. I like to play hard, but I work harder. And I weather the storm cause I'm built stronger.
What is up, ladies and gentlemen? We are back. We are live. It is the Freight Coach Morning Show, the top morning show in transportation, coming to you guys every single weekday, 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 10:30 Central, to break down some industry headlines, and most importantly, provide some actual insight into what you can do with all of this information. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. This is the real side of freight, ladies and gentlemen. And I say that before every single show. And what I mean by that is I only speak to transportation professionals on this show, as well as my twice-a-week long-form podcast, because I want to talk to the right individuals who have done what you're looking to do or who are currently doing what you're trying to achieve. So you can take that information, apply it, utilize it, and see a meaningful difference in your business and your life. Tracy St. Clair, good morning to you over on YouTube. Before I got a guest that I'm going to bring up here in just a second, you guys. We got some announcements. So I have another episode with Jesse Buckingham that dropped. That is live right now. He's with Vuma, and we talked about automation and all that fun stuff out there in his journey and building his company up. So that's available right now. But we're here to talk about Mexico freight today. We're here to talk about the rise in cross-border transportation to our friends of the South. And there is no other person who I think is more qualified to talk about that all things Mexico than Mr. Matt Silver. So Matt, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
No, I'm looking forward to it, man. It's been a while. The last time we had seen each other in person, I think, was at the JOC a couple of years ago, and you were just at your previous role, and now I think you were just starting because you had just exited your other company, and now you are since back out and building again, man. So what is Cargado, and what's been new, man?
So we're building Cargado. Cargado. It's Spanish for loaded. Yep. It's a tech company. I'm not going to go quite fully into detail as to what exactly we're building quite yet, but what I'll tell you is that it's a software company. We have a subscription model. There's almost 20 companies that are actively paying to use our software today, and there's a few hundred that are also using it through partnerships with those customers. We've been focused heavily on cross-border Mexico freight and solving some of the problems that a lot of these brokers run into, as you know, something that I experienced in the last decade of managing cross-border freight. So that's what we're building right now.
So this is a tool that, is it going to be for kind of everybody in the industry then?
There's, we have a long roadmap of a lot of different things that we're building. So there's going to be different things for everybody in the industry, but not everything is for everybody.
Okay. So why Mexico freight? Like, what was it about that? Because it's like everybody kind of runs into Canada, it seems like, right? And there's a whole other world down there, literally, when it comes to opportunity. So like, what brings you down there for that? And, because you've been, I think ever since I've met you, this has been your thing, man. So like, what's that big driver behind it?
So originally when I worked at Coyote full-time, it started off in the San Diego office. I was booking battery freight for Exide and Interstate Battery. And one of the lanes that I was booking was this lane going from Phoenix to Yuma, Arizona. And I had been booking a dedicated carrier on it that also happened to be the receiver that was receiving the battery loads. So they did warehousing and transportation. It was almost like a private fleet backhaul. I was booking it for pretty cheap. I was making good money on it, making good margin. The rest of my team kind of gave me some crap for the fact that I was only booking what came across as gravy freight compared to a very large customer's freight that was moving from the Phoenix area going to Yuma. But instead of these being first come, first serve and flexible windows, these were scheduled appointments that were late in the evening that could sometimes take 4 hours to get loaded. And so the carrier that I was booking on those battery loads would not take this other freight. And so because I was getting so much crap, I started developing other carriers in the Yuma area and just started cold calling on carriers within a 100-mile radius of Yuma, which included Calexico. One of the carriers that I found was a carrier called TBM, who at the time they were running the PNW. So they were going up to Washington and Oregon, running freight back down the I-5, back down to Southern California. They said preferably to San Diego or Calexico, but they weren't too specific about why, or if they were, I wasn't paying enough attention. But eventually they started asking me for Mexico freight and saying, hey, we actually service Mexico through these border cities as well as through Laredo and Del Rio. And so I started looking for Mexico freight after a while. And one day I found this new lane that a sales rep had offered out to the whole company. And I was able to convert it, made, about $200 in margin per load. And before I knew it, I was starting to just hunt for Mexico freight because I was making more money doing that with the carrier. And so that's how I got into it. I started just booking freight. And before I knew it, I was this guy, Eddie, who was the COO at Coyote at the time, came over to my desk and said, what are you doing booking all this Mexico freight? And I said, I'm having more fun booking Mexico freight than, at this point I was in private fleet than doing private fleet stuff. I'm making more money doing it, and it's interesting. And he said, well, then your new job is to go figure out how to grow Mexico. And so sat in the corner with this other guy, Clark. We started working on Mexico and then just started building it.
So do you think, because there's I think I just saw Jason Miller post this up this morning about how Mexico freight is raising over a lot compared to, and actually freight from Canada is dropping in overall freight volume out there. Do you think this is the next opportunity inside of transportation? Because it's no secret that with a lot of the tariffs and everything that are going on out there, people are shifting manufacturing out of Southeast Asia down into Mexico and other areas out there. Do you think that over, what's your time frame on this? Where there's going to be an absolute increase in freight volume?
I think we're already seeing the increase in freight volume. If you look at the numbers from Q1 of last year to Q1 of this year, it looks like every border city nearly doubled, which means that cross-border Mexico freight doubled. I don't know how accurate that data is, but it comes from the government. And so I do think that Mexico volume is starting to grow. We're seeing that as a combination of just the bounce back from the pandemic, but also the nearshoring trends and everybody saying it's time to go move manufacturing to Mexico. We've seen this with tons of companies. We saw it with, Mattel has been pretty public about their investment in Mexico. Tesla, obviously, with the giant factory that they're building in Monterrey. That facility has still not been built yet, which means that we're still a few years away from that volume impacting cross-border volume. But what I can tell you is just in every conversation that I've had with every single freight brokerage that I've met in the last 6 months, every single one of them is investing in Mexico, whether it's with a full-blown office, whether it's with a single person in Laredo or a single Spanish speaker in their office in the US, they're all starting to invest in Mexico because all their customers are asking for that help. And it's becoming a norm that you have to be able to support Mexico in order to be able to offer, that full-blown service to your customers.
What was the main driver for this? Because I don't want to say extensive experience moving freight out of Mexico, but I've moved 500 truckloads out of Mexico. And obviously it's a lot different, but the opportunities now are seemingly increasing exponentially out there. And you need I think if you're a more mature brokerage, you need something like this inside of there. If you're a startup and, again, when I talk to people about, choosing a niche and really diving into that, I'm really talking about building your book of business up, because I think too many people are too scattered and going after way too much, where they need to kind of focus on one thing, especially in today's freight market, man. I've been consistently prospecting for the last 18 months, and I know the feedback that I'm getting. It's not that what we're offering or saying is wrong. It's just the freight volumes are not there. And there's some modes out there that I wouldn't touch. Even at this point in my career, I'm not going to just all of a sudden start going after liquid bulk moves or hopper bottom move. Could I figure it out? Yes. But is it my best usage of my time? Absolutely not. But I also talk about when you have existing customers who are coming to you with opportunities, you need to explore how to do it. And I think that with a lot of people shifting out of Southeast Asia into Mexico and looking to reinvest into Mexico, this is something that people need to understand. And, even if it's just the freight forwarding aspect of it, how is it different to import a full truckload from Mexico compared to Canada? And and I think knowing those discernible differences. So with that being said, what's the big difference out there? How do you get a truckload out of Mexico into the United States?
So there's a few things. One is, and first of all, like the coaching that I always give people when it comes to like not servicing things like liquid bulk is that there's more value in saying no to a customer than there is just saying yes to everything.
Yeah.
And when you say, hey, no to that, but like here are the 3 things that we do really well, they actually believe you more than if you say that you do everything really well, because they just know that you're full of shit. Sorry.
No, you can speak freely on this show. Come on.
they know it when you say that you do everything. You've got 12 people that work at your company. Do a couple things really well, or one thing really well, and just excel at that, and you'll make your your niche there. But so when it comes to Mexico freight, I think there's a few things. One is, I do think you need some sort of operator that understands Mexico freight that can kind of untangle a mess that happens at the border. So like, take, let's say you're moving loads for 2 different customers, moving northbound through Laredo, and you mistakenly send the wrong paperwork to the wrong carrier for each of those loads. And so 2 different carriers cross 2 of the wrong loads with the wrong paperwork, and you have a complete mess at the border. You have to deal with 2 different customs brokers, potentially 4, because you have the Mexican broker and the U.S. broker for each of those scenarios. Spanish is necessary for a lot of that communication. Someone needs to be able to untangle that mess. And so you need support there. So you need to be able to deal with the customs broker. If you're going to move freight door to door, then you're going to need a carrier that's based in the U.S. that services Mexico, which means that they send their trailers into Mexico. It doesn't mean that their trucks go to Mexico, but their trailers do. Those trailers move in Mexico with a partner company, so that it's kind of like an interline or interchange agreement, where the carriers are set up with each other. They know each other, but they pass their trailers back and forth, and then they'll use a transfer company to move the trailer across the border, or be one driver that'll actually take the load into the U.S. and deliver it. And so you need to be able to rely on like communicating with both of those types of companies, and communicating with the trucking companies that can actually provide that door-to-door service. If you are going to try to transload freight, you need a TMS that can actually support booking 2 different carriers on a load, being able to split that, and being able to assign the different carriers and send them Raycons. And so there's a lot of complexity that goes into it, but ultimately you need that leader that can spearhead everything for you, that can really help grow your business and focus on growth and execution and footprint strategy when it comes to like where you service.
Why do you think, like, why are there extra layers going into it? Because it's like, I think going into Canada, it's pretty simple. You got one border broker, you got the PARS number, and that's essentially all that is required to go into Canada, right? But like, why is there added complexities going in and out of Mexico? Is it with NAFTA? Was it drafted differently at that time? Is there different, what is the overall main difference on why there is this?
There's bigger concern about people sneaking into the United States from Mexico than from Canada. And so there's different levels of security and process in place at the southern border that requires that freight not move quite so freely across the border. And so there's definitely process that makes it move more effectively and more efficiently, but there's still a lot of process. And for every load leaving Mexico, Mexico wants to make sure they're keeping track of what's leaving and that they're getting their cut before it leaves. The United States needs to make sure that it's coming into the U.S. legally and safely and everything else. And if it's leaving the U.S., there's still a need for Mexico or the U.S. exporter to export the goods from the United States, and Mexico wants a cut of whatever comes into Mexico as well. And so they need the Mexico import customs broker to handle the import stuff. And so you need the customs brokers that work together on both sides, because the freight's moving across the border. I always compare it to when you're traveling internationally and you leave, and they check your passport as you're leaving, and then they check as you arrive into that country. Similar to freight, except with more steps.
Yeah. Is this something like what was the main driver, do you think, in the because it's essentially nearshoring at this point, right? What is the main driver from U.S. manufacturers to bring it down into Mexico? Was it what happened during the pandemic, that all the port backups and everything else, that people are like, hey, we can't go through this ever again?
It was a few things. So one is the USMCA became NAFTA, or sorry, NAFTA became the USMCA. Mm-hmm. So that happened during the Trump administration, and effectively it required that more parts that go into a car need to be made within North America. It encouraged a lot more manufacturing to happen within North America. So that's the US, Mexico, and Canada. And it encouraged more manufacturing to move closer to home. And so the USMCA was the first kind of major domino that started this whole trend. The second one was the pandemic that scared everybody into thinking like maybe it's not such a good idea to rely on Asia so heavily for manufacturing. Start thinking about moving to Mexico. And then the third piece was that the proximity for Mexico to the United States became more realistic. Like there's such a heavy Latino population in the United States that like it's much more likely that you're going to have somebody working at a company that can speak Spanish than you've got somebody that speaks Mandarin. And so the ability to go to Mexico, similar time zones, cultures are much more similar. It's easier to go back and forth between the two countries. It just makes much more sense operationally to manage your supply chains in Mexico than overseas. There was a one time that I was flying back from Monterey back to Chicago. I was sitting with the VP of operations of a Fortune 500 manufacturer that oversees 5 plants in Mexico, along with a few plants in China, which like I always look into like the best networking opportunities when I'm traveling. Because this guy had tons of cross-border freight, but I had a conversation with him about managing all these facilities in Mexico versus China. And he said, it's a million times easier to manage everything in Mexico. He goes down there once a month. For China, he goes once a quarter because just like it kills him from like a travel perspective, the jet lag, the time zones. He already has to spend all hours of the day and night on video calls with people throughout the world. But he has 5 plants in Mexico, and he's glad it's 5 in Mexico and only a couple in China, versus the reverse where it'd only be a couple in Mexico and several in China.
Mm-hmm. I think that there's going to be, I think it's like a lot of just, kind of controlling the supply chain more. I think that has a lot to do with it, because it's like, and then it's also like the cost of production and like the timing of production, right? Because if something's manufactured in China or the Middle East, it's like it's a month to ship it via vessel. And then it goes into the ports, and then it could sit in the port for 5 to 7 days while it's waiting to get offloaded. And it can be manufactured, trucked in, and then on your shelf within like 2 weeks if it's being done in Mexico. So I think from like a production standpoint alone, and then obviously there's a lot smarter people than me who are making these decisions. And I'm assuming the cost to produce the goods is very similar to what it is now when you factor in all of the the tariffs, and then you factor in the transit time and the wait time and everything else. Even if the cost of labor is higher in Mexico compared to China, which I don't have the numbers in front of me, so I don't know, but I'm assuming that was made where they're like, hey, we have more control if it's done in the continental North America, excuse me, as opposed to, importing it.
100%. It's you get better quality control, you get better transit times. The less time that you have something in transit means the less time that you potentially own something, which means that the less time it's spending on your bucks. So the fact that you might, have something manufactured and on your truck within, 4 days before a load arrives to your dock versus, 4 weeks is, potentially 3.5 weeks of additional float that you have to put out there to own those goods.
Mm-hmm. What's a big thing? Like, is there a certain product that's being manufactured more in Mexico now than, than others? Or is it kind of, there's just a rise that's kind of across the board? Cause I know like a lot of pipe is manufactured down in Mexico, for example. So, cause we do a lot of flatbed stuff. So I know that's been done down there, and those are like, so that's the bulk majority of the freight that I've imported from Mexico is via pipe. Is there, obviously auto parts is another big one as well that's down. Is there any other rising commodities that people could start paying attention to?
I mean, I was just in Eagle Pass this past week and learned all about the fact that beer is is a major import from Mexico into the United States with the Constellation facility in Nava that is apparently the largest brewery in the world that produces Corona and Modelo there. So there's hops that are going into Mexico. There's all the ingredients that go in the beer go southbound. But yeah, I mean, there's automotive, industrial, aerospace. Think about all the big machinery like a Caterpillar, John Deere, a Komatsu. Like a lot of that type of equipment is made in Mexico. You're seeing a lot of other retail products like I mentioned Mattel earlier, and a lot of their competitors, I'm sure, manufacture in Mexico. It's, I always tell people, like, walk through a grocery store and go look at the labels and see all the different, produce that's made in Mexico or that's grown in Mexico. And so there's lots of stuff that you can find on the internet that have long lists of commodities. I actually have this pamphlet right here on my desk that has a long list of goods that come in out of Mexico,
Nice.
soybeans and vehicles and corn and plastics. So it's nonstop in terms of what moves across the border. But I don't think it's any one commodity that's like driving this. It's across the board.
Mm-hmm. Is there any, like, what kind, from like a business perspective, is there any additional or different kind of insurance that I need for stuff like this? Like, how does this work to, because obviously you brought up, there's a carrier that needs to transport it up from Mexico. There's a transfer carrier that brings it across the border and so on. So like, is there any special insurance that's required for this? Because like my wife's from Mexico. I know when we drive down to Mexico, we purchase Mexico insurance for our vehicle and everything as well. So is that the same for this, or is it when you contract with a carrier that has those contacts in Mexico, everything's covered from that perspective?
No, so trucking companies don't have cargo insurance in Mexico, and freight brokerages are not required to have it either.
Okay.
The freight's only insured in the United States by law. Mexico does not require it. You like, it's a minimal amount of cents per pound or something like that gets reimbursed. So it ends up being like $2,000. We always partnered with Reliance Partners. They have a program called Borderless Coverage that Mark Vickers there runs that allows you to buy cargo insurance in Mexico. And I would always encourage a broker, a 3PL, to get it set up, or a shipper potentially to get set up with them also, because you're better off applying it at like the account level or at a lane level rather than asking a carrier to get it set up, because most trucking companies won't set it up themselves, and so you're better off partnering with Borderless Coverage to get that set up.
Mm-hmm.
Then you get full coverage in Mexico with a deductible. That has to be paid, but
okay,
better than getting a load stolen in Mexico and not having any coverage.
Yeah, good luck tracking that down. What is something from like a structural standpoint? Say somebody's listening to this right now, Matt, and they're like, "Hey, this is something we want to seriously explore." Do you recommend people go and build relationships with freight forwarders who go in and out of Mexico? Like, what's step one for anybody?
Anybody being a trucking company or a freight brokerage or a shipper?
Both, all above.
So if I'm a trucking company that I want to expand into Mexico, I would need to find partner carriers to work with. I would love to see trucking companies in the U.S. start expanding into Mexico. We've only seen, U.S. Express and Covenant pull out of it. We have not really seen anybody invest into it. And so it'd be great to see expansion into Mexico with U.S.-based trucking companies. They'd have to have 3 trailers for every tractor. So you need the right ratio to send trailers across the border, and you need the right partner carriers. What I will offer is any carrier that wants to actually do that, I'll happily make them introductions to Mexican carriers that they could partner with. For a freight broker that wants to expand into Mexico, you need a leader that can actually go do it and run point for you. Number one. Number two, I really think you need a presence in Mexico. And I always, I just wrote this in my newsletter that came out this morning. Monterrey to me would be the number one spot. I know a lot of people lean towards Guadalajara because of the kind of central spot it is in Mexico, but Monterrey is only 3 hours away from Laredo. The proximity to the border makes it a great bicultural, talent hub. It's getting more expensive to hire there, but it's still, cost effective compared to the United States. And it's very central in terms of, getting access to shippers. And then when it comes to the shipper side, if I were thinking about, nearshoring and relying on suppliers in Mexico or building a plant in Mexico, I would probably focus on closer to the border, whether it's Monterrey or Saltillo, although I know that those areas are getting heavily dense. And so people are starting to move further south to the Bajío, which is central Mexico. But I would partner up with the right, logistics providers that can help you move freight across the border rather than trying to just centralize it and do it yourself. And, I would invest in the right partnerships kind of across the border, both in terms of the customs broker, freight broker, and manufacturers in Mexico.
Is there certain regions in Mexico for commodities, right? So it's like you look, just for example, you look here in the US, the steel belt, the Rust Belt and stuff like that. There's specific areas of the United States that are known for producing steel or agriculture and stuff like that. Is that same hold true down in Mexico?
Yeah, somebody used to have an amazing map of all the produce in Mexico, and I'll try to go rebuild it at some point. But produce is definitely in southern Mexico and like southwestern Mexico. You have a lot of automotive and industrial and food and bev being manufactured in Monterrey. And there's a golden triangle, if you will. And this is also in my newsletter from this morning. There's a map, but you've got Monterrey, which is about 155 miles south of Laredo. You have Guadalajara, which is about 600 miles southwest of Laredo. And you have Mexico City and Puebla, which is about 700 miles southeast of Laredo, and it forms a triangle between Monterrey, Guadalajara, and Mexico City. And everything you could imagine, industrial, electronics, automotive, they all kind of come out of those three markets, and everything in between there, which is the Bajío, which means the valley. You could have electronics and tequila heavily coming out of Guadalajara. Tequila has to come out of Jalisco. It doesn't come anywhere else. Mezcal can come from Oaxaca and from a couple other spots, maybe Mexico City. And then electronics and some automotive in Chihuahua and in Juarez. And then fun fact, there's over 600 maquiladoras, which are Mexican manufacturers that manufacture for the United States, just based in the Juarez area alone.
Dang, dude. I think that people need to think ahead of the trends. They need to be very proactive about this, because I think that, and especially depending on how this upcoming presidential election shakes out, there could be a mass migration of infrastructure and everything sent down to Mexico right away, because there's no secret that President Trump is, will fight for, manufacturing to be at least near shored, like he was doing in his previous administration and everything. And which obviously I've never hid the fact that I'm a fan of, right? Like everything should be made in America, in my opinion. And, and if it's not going to be made in America, it needs to be in North America. It needs to be somewhere where we control our own manufacturing, and we don't ever risk being in the situation we were a couple of years ago, when other countries could just freely shut down and we had no say in it, and then we're left without anything. I feel like that's a very bad situation for us to be in ever again. And so it's like I think people really need to get well versed on this. I think that Mexico is going to continue to rise in manufacturing and other parts of it, and you need to be well versed in how this is going to work, especially if you're going to get in with any companies. And that could be your big opportunity, right? Because it's like, as domestic truckloads are essentially stagnant, right? Business development, yes, it happens, but it's not rolling at a new pace. You need to look, how do I offer another service that I can comfortably do, that I can keep growing my business in some way, shape, or form? Because, you're not going to get in at this point of the year with any large, dry van shipper that's out there, the Kraft Heinz's of the worlds, or the water, bottled water, or Anheuser-Busch, like that's not happening, right? So what are you going to do to possibly stand out to somebody else? And I truly think like this is such a great opportunity for people to explore and become well versed in.
I will say, like, in my time selling Mexico into enterprise shippers, both enterprise and middle market, if there's one way to get in with a customer mid kind of RFP cycle or outside of the RFP cycle, it's with cross-border. That's typically your way to open the wedge up, because they're much more likely to be running into a problem with customs or with like the border or anything like that during the year than they are with just their domestic freight.
Yeah. Francis Garcia has a question here. Matt, do you have anybody for him?
Yeah, reach out to Milo Richer. It's ericher.com.
Perfect. Well, that works, you guys. Well, hey, Matt, I appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much for joining me. And if you guys have any questions about freight going in and out of Mexico, again, I follow Matt for many reasons, but he's really spearheaded this over the last couple of years since I've gotten to know him. And I think that he is the best source of information out there. Subscribe to his newsletter. How does anybody reach out to you though, Matt, if they want to find out more?
LinkedIn, X, or my newsletter. You can find me on any of those. Just Google me in Mexico and you'll find me somewhere.
Perfect.
Or for Corrado.
Perfect. Sounds good, Matt. Well, hey, that's going to be it for today, you guys. As always, if you guys got value in what you heard, subscribe to the show, you guys. Share it out there to your network, because if you see value, your network's going to see value as well. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys, and we'll be talking to you soon.